Hey,
Right.
thanks. Appreciate it. So, my topic today is the idea of doing our best. And it seems pretty simple and straightforward, right? Like we can all say that. But this is kind of the cornerstone of what I feel like is my piece of ministry, my spiritual belief. And it's about recognizing that sometimes our best isn't that great. And from my perspective, that has helped me to cultivate grace and understanding for other people's best not being so great sometimes too. So I thought it would be interesting um, to share some of those with each other. So a time when you doing your best was really not that great, and like what you learned about yourself from it, and then how that may have impacted you looking at someone else in a different way later on. Um, so I could share one to begin. So I used to teach, help teach a peer support group. So it was like a workshop where people learned all these techniques that you can use, and then you pair people up and it becomes part of this community. And um, this one guy, super nice guy, was in the class and he was doing a share, and then he made a comment about a silly commercial that he had watched and how funny it was. And at that point in time, I didn't even have a TV in my house. And I was like, dude, you're watching too much TV. And like I could tell it really like hit him and impacted him. And my body at that point was really healthy, and like I was really active and I was really out in community. And then later on, like I didn't really notice it as much in the moment, right? And then later on in life, when I had health issues and I wasn't as active and I started watching a bunch of shows, I was like, all right, that was not what my ideal best would be, but it was my best in that moment. And any of, issues like this that I think of, including like a big macro version. So like I also think of like cycles of abuse within like families or just systems, and how I can look back and see generations before me were doing their best based on what they knew and what culture and society talked about. Um, and then the next generation, how they look at it, and they learn from it and their best can get better. So that is the, like I said, the cornerstone of my own personal spiritual journey and like holding space for other people. So I don't know if anybody else has a time when their best wasn't what they would like it to be that they want to share, and what they learned from it.
I will, because I'm
Yeah.
still a little bit in it. Um, I started really seriously publishing my work, did some in 2016, but really started in 2018 in a habit of publishing something once a month, routinely, all the way through up until March of last year. I'm sorry, May of last year, June, around in there. And I had a bit of an attitude of, well, these writers who are publishing once a year, twice a year, when it's under your control, that's just, or people who aren't writing every day or writing, gosh, it's been 16 years since I wrote something. And I don't mean someone who's working on a passion project or their first book for certain, but people who, well, this is my living, this is what I do. It's like, yeah, but you write 100 words a year. This was just my attitude. I understand it's not, or yeah, I've decided I'll publish 2 books a year. So, well, no one's going to remember. Just very, very almost a teenager attitude, because I was new to it and happened to be in a good place mentally where I could just charge ahead. And it went right through 2020, 21, just fine. Last year, we had our first trip out into the world in a couple of years, and we're out of town. And I was also taking classes at the same time. I never missed a workshop, never missed my homework ever for like 7 years. So this was a big, long, energetic push. And in this past June, I hit a wall, just crashed hard. And it hit me in a hotel room in Appleton, Wisconsin. Was also starting training for the Peachtree for the first time, just a bunch of stuff happening. And I just sat there and realized I can't publish this book today. I just can't. And it wasn't that I didn't have the time. It wasn't, I had all my stuff with me, but my brain, my creative well was just, nope. And that has gone on. I still write every day. I still get at least 500 words in every day, but I was doing 1,000 or 2,000 every day for years. And it's just now, I'm just now starting to look around and go, maybe I could publish a couple things because I've got like 4 novels that I've written in that time, and several novellas and short stories and things that are just sitting because my publishing batteries went dead. I just went a little too far. And I've definitely developed a lot more empathy as the new person who did really, really well for several years and then just drained myself a little too much when it comes to the business side, particularly. And it was very interesting because, like I said, it felt like that teenager. Well, what's wrong with you? You know, the teenager looking at the 50-year-old, the 53-year-old. Well, why can't you do this? I could do this. So I had very much of that attitude, and being brand new, 7 years is brand new in writing and publishing. That's nothing. That's a toddler, but I still had that attitude, you know, the newly converted, well, I can do this. Why can't you? And it just has been very interesting to regain my empathy toward life hitting, because nothing bad happened. I could get it when, you know, you move homes or you have a loss in your life or a job change or something like that. I didn't have any of that stuff. None of it. There was just some part of me, like when your phone just shuts down, boop, done. So it's been very good. And I feel like I'm kind of looking out into the publishing world and blinking because it's really bright out there. But I've also learned for myself to give myself that time. And it's okay if I occasionally don't turn a homework assignment in or don't do a class altogether because they're recorded. I can watch them later. So it feels like maturing in the world of publishing. It feels like maturing in the world of indie publishing and looking at it from a more adult perspective instead of that bratty adolescent. And gives me more awareness of how it's not just a hard life role that can slow you down. It's just being alive and just having a human brain, because brains are goofy, brains are silly, and you have no idea when yours is going to shut down on you. So it's been interesting. And another thing, I'll mention, when I was in my priestess circles in Atlanta, I had a huge realization of my parents and especially my grandparents. They were doing the best they could with the limited materials they had. And some of the things they did, and only one parent left out of all of them, but some of the things they did are still unacceptable and still hurtful and still painful. And they were still doing the best they could. So that was a big one. At times, their best was not good. Their best was awful. And my best has been pretty mediocre the last few months as far as publishing. But that's okay. You know, you just having that awareness let me deal with them a lot better. It didn't mean it was all okay. It didn't mean some of the things, the awful things that they sometimes did were okay, but it gave me a better way to relate to them, to understand.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that this experience with you slowing down in your publishing gave you some self-reflection, you gave yourself some grace, and then you were able to reflect that onto your parents and the generations before. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, how when we look at ourselves and do our work to, you know, say, okay, I was doing my best, then this can reflect out. And that is a beautiful example of that. Thank you for sharing. I love that. Yeah. Does anybody else have an example of that they would like to share?
Mine would be around raising kids because I was a single parent most of the time, but
Mhm.
had two different fathers for each of the kids. And it was basically hit or miss in the early days. And then as they each aged, they met their fathers and in one case went to live with them. But I feel like some of the memories, because they're in their 30s now as well, and they basically have memories of back in more angry days where I would have temper tantrums when I was disciplining them. And now everything has shifted, and I've even lived with the youngest child as an adult in more of a healing environment and having gone through some of the anger management and figuring that all out. But the earliest child, the eldest, doesn't see it and has not experienced that. And so they have two entirely different memory banks of how they were raised growing up. And so I'm real curious to see how that plays out going forward, because once they start having the kids and I start becoming more involved, then that will be, the new mom or gran with a new
Yeah.
perspective on how to treat life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And has that, looking at yourself, has that made you think about anyone else and how they were in all of that? And, you know,
Well, I'm conscious of how they are making decisions about how they run their lives. And then I'm also thinking to the previous generation, my own parents, and maybe forgiving them for having those temper tantrums or those bold, massive disagreements that came down the line through that.
Yeah.
So I guess it's generational healing is what we're talking about.
Yeah, it is. It's internal healing, it's current healing, and it is generational healing. It is all of those things for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Charlie. Welcome.
Morning.
We're talking about how we all understand we're all doing our best, all the time, but sometimes our best isn't that great in a moment. And when we can look at that and find a grace for ourselves, how that can often translate into looking at someone else's moments where their bust wasn't ideal and extending grace to them. And so we're um, having a moment for different people to share examples of when they realized their best wasn't that great and what they learned from it and how that reflected outwards in their lives.
So you're talking about grace internally and recognizing it outside of us in others. Well,
Yeah, and acknowledging, that, I'm always striving to do my best, but there are times when like my low blood sugar is low and I can't handle the stress, or like, I'm so frustrated with things that, I'm overwhelmed, and, you know, not all of my interactions are perfect all the time. And so when I can recognize those in myself, I can have more patience and understanding for other people having those moments.
so you're talking about the shadow within us, the shadow side, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when we're undergoing, yeah, and then often we project that onto others.
Well, sometimes, but this is today's topic is about when we look at ourselves and we see those moments where we fell down and we know we were doing our best, we were maxed out, and we find that grace for ourselves, like how that translates into grace for other people and understanding other people, and maybe even not taking personally what someone else has done from learning from ourselves.
So,
Yeah.
so biblically, if you say, well, you're recognizing the sins within yourself, and then you
Yeah.
see the mistakes in others, and you could be more forgiving.
Yeah.
If you can forgive yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Does anyone else have a moment where their best was not ideal looking back, and they learned from that and would like to share?
I know I have. I just can't think of any right now off the top of my head. But this sounds a little bit like the Four Agreements with Don Miguel Ruiz a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, I think absolutely, you know, not taking things personally. And this is, I think, the mechanism for me on how I can get to that ideal of not taking things personally. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's I like to look at, like, we can all, you know, think of these catchphrases of things that are ideals and spout them out, but I like to try and figure out, like, how do I get there, you know? And that's why this is the cornerstone of what I feel like is my spiritual journey and ministry with people is recognizing that we're all doing our best all the time. um yeah, and if you can't think of something in yourself, like, maybe there's another time where you looked at someone else and realized, okay, that's not ideal, but I know they're doing their best. And what compassion, or how did it help you move through that situation when you recognize that? That's something we could all share too. If anybody has a moment like that. I think a few of us have already mentioned that, like looking back at our parents and they were doing their best. So yeah. Anybody else have anything
Yeah, I
on
think
that
I
vein?
probably have mentioned this no doubt before, is something like that. Something you don't even, burden you don't even know you're carrying, right? It's like you don't recognize that you're, anyway. I was doing a seminar that lasted a long time, and I was driving home on the freeway one time, and it was an awareness type of seminar, and all of a sudden I started crying, and I couldn't believe it. And what I was crying about was um, my relationship with my brother, who was 6 years older than I, and it was just the freedom that it gave me when I was able to not be judgmental and give up all my judgments on him. It lifted a weight right off my shoulders that released a lot of energy.
Mhm.
And so even when I called him the next day and said, I'd like to come over and visit you, um, he was surprised because, you know, we didn't have that kind of relationship. So when I went over there, I was still um, that spirit that sets us free, that energy was still pouring out of me. It was all restricted, and I had no idea that that's what was going on within me until it released. And my brother listened to me in amazement, and his very religious wife had to run out of the room because she couldn't tolerate the energy that was emitting from him. It was like, it was frightening for her, but it was liberating for me. So sometimes there's dark things that are within us we're totally unaware of, and we created them.
Yeah.
So that was a real eye opener for me. And then I was telling that story at a social gathering to some of our friends, and the lady said to me, "Oh, Charlie, you're no different than you were, you know, a week ago." And now I looked at that, and in a way she was right, because why? Because now I was judgmental. I was wanting to fix my brother. Okay, so I want him to go to the same seminar. I want to help him out. So I was still being judgmental. It was not as negative, but it was still judgmental. So it was interesting that that woman kind of brought that to my attention.
Yeah. And how did that feel in that moment to realize you were still being judgmental, and that, like, what did that shift in your mind in that moment when you had that realization?
Yeah, well, it certainly, um, certainly caused me a period of reflection and to look at just what is my need to do that, and why can't I just accept him the way he is? But coincidentally, so I kind of gave up. I just surrendered it. But coincidentally, about 10 years later, my brother went into a spinoff of the seminar that I went to called LifeSpring, and it evoked, it changed his lookout a whole lot. But more than that, it changed the look out of so many of the women in the audience that had trouble with their relationships with men. They sought him out because he had been married 5 times and did a lot of crazy things that now he poured his soul out, I guess. So I wasn't there, but women would write him and ask, opinions or something, or express their appreciation. So, yeah, so the seed I had planted turned out eventually came into fruition.
I love that. I love how you say that the seed. I think that definitely, I've seen that so many times, that a moment that we share with somebody else, they may not take the full impact in at the moment, but they get it later. Or even that seed for ourselves, like that moment where I wasn't doing my best with that person in the class, that was a seed for me too, to look back later and just gain that wider acceptance and grace, for sure. And then another piece of this that I just want to share in conjunction with, accepting that everyone's always doing their best, is that what we label as negative emotions are really just information. And so when I combine everyone's doing their best, and I believe that, and if someone has what society labels a negative emotion, like anger or sadness or resentment, I can look at that more now as information. So what is their soul trying to convey with that emotion? Like what is the flag? What is the thing that needs to be addressed? So when I combine those two things, wow, I've really got something at that moment in time, is what I have felt a lot. Yeah, does that make sense? Looking at negative emotions is just like information, and yeah.
Yeah, so give us an example of how that worked for you.
Yeah, I can give an example from my own world. So recently I was going through a training program. I'm training to be a licensed psilocybin facilitator here in Oregon. And I went to a retreat for this program. So they had 2 90-minute classes, and then we went into a 3-day retreat. And we were to do ketamine journeys as part of this retreat. And at my journey, the people who were holding space for it, the faculty, did not address a concern I had, and that was actually against the teachings that they were giving us about how we're to hold space for our own clients. And the next morning, when I was sleep deprived for 3 nights in a row, because of various things like pain, insomnia, I was in a foreign bed and I couldn't sleep. And just having done the ketamine journey the night before, that next morning, your head kind of is jumbled sometimes after a journey like that. Like, you can follow and you can talk to people, but like your own thoughts, it's like someone just kind of shook it up a little bit and they're all kind of settling out still. And so when I talked to the people who had not, literally I had said, I have this concern, and the teacher that I was talking to, her boyfriend, who was also in faculty, like looked at me and said, we'll talk about it tomorrow. And then they both turned away from me. And so the next morning when I was addressing them, I did what we might call a calling out instead of a calling in because I was not well resourced. So that is an example of I was stressed in my tone when I talked to them. I actually showed that I was irritated and even slightly angry that they had ignored the issue that I had brought up instead of just talking to me about it briefly. And if everyone involved had been able to say, oh, she sounds angry, what's the information that needs to be addressed? Like that's a sign that then needs to be addressed. Everything would have played out differently. But instead I was tone policed. And so that's a very personal example of like how I didn't do my best recently and how the other people in the situation took it very personally and were not able to just see, oh, this irritation and even anger sound is a sign, okay, something needs to be addressed. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, and I'd like to a little more clarification.
Sure.
So when some issue came up from you talked to the facilitator and his wife, is that what you said, or a significant other?
There's a whole range of faculty, and there was 2 faculty right near me before I was to do this journey, and I asked them a question about the setting, and instead of addressing my concern, they just said, we'll talk about it tomorrow, which would be too late because I was 5 minutes from doing a journey. Does that help clarify? So
Yeah.
the faculty's boyfriend, who was also on faculty, like jumped in, and just shut down the conversation.
So they dismissed your concern,
Mm-hmm.
and you got angry with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was irritated and even kind of angry the next morning, you know, because
So-
they,
And the next morning, then you brought it up to them or to the seminar, to them, you confronted.
Yeah.
And what was their response?
well, there was a varied response to that. So because I sounded angry, one of the biggest initial responses was a pushback, right? Because those negative emotions that come up, they're hard for people to deal with. And I get that. I understand that. I've had my own experience with that, right? So if I had been better resourced and not, you know, had so much tension and stress and done what I call a calling in, where you can more kindly and gently bring someone into the concern rather than like kind of pushing out like, hey, I've got this problem, then maybe it would have gone better, right?
So when you confronted them, with your concern, which was really your anger for being dismissed, and they,
Just to clarify, it wasn't just the dismissal. It's we're literally being taught that when we hold space for someone who's going on a journey, we are to be proactive and make sure all of their concerns are addressed and that they're really in consent.
Right.
And so if I, as a facilitator, as a licensed facilitator, had ignored a concern of someone that I was facilitating a journey for, that would have been unethical. And so it wasn't just that they were dismissive, it's that they were going against their own teachings in that moment, just to clarify. And that's like more personal stuff about me that you guys,
Yeah, well,
more than you need to know, but.
They were staff members, right? So you expected more from them than they were willing to give.
Yeah. And so back to like, you know,
All the hypocrisy.
yeah, yes. And that I think the hypocrisy is why when I was not well resourced the next morning, I was angry about that, right? And so instead of looking at me being angry as like something to address, it was very much like pushed back on, and they weren't able to like, you know, look through that and just look at it as information.
Well, for
And
most
that's
of
the
us,
reason.
we feel rejected, which makes us feel hurt, which
Yeah.
makes us be angry.
Right.
How
Right.
dare I give you the power to make me angry, you idiots.
Yeah.
So it's a multitude of emotions going on,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's usually based on the hypocrisy that you saw,
Mhm.
and you were enraged by that. And I see why.
Yeah.
It was just the opposite of what they're teaching.
They're incompetent. I would have been angry too.
Yeah. Yeah. So does
Their
that
personal
help?
health. Yeah.
Yeah. Does that help as like an example of
Yeah, I
being
think,
able a negative emotion?
yeah, I think it
Yeah.
opens up a good discussion that you're willing to share that personal experience. It reminded me of the time when I was a student practitioner at a Church of Religious Science, and our teacher, who was a wonderful teacher, that he was credited with having the voice of God, one of the deep bass voices. And after the church service, we we would go into the basement for coffee and snacks and stuff and socialize.
Mhm.
While we were down there, a woman was coming there, and she was very upset about something. She was very vociferous, loudly speaking that she was angry about something, and we were listening to her. And later on, the wonderful teacher and minister of the church kind of chastise us, and we wonder why. You should have done something to prevent her from, you should have used your healing powers to stop her from venting. And I looked at that and I said, wow, I don't know how that works. But so I think that's a good example for all of us, that I guess sometimes one of the most amazing things that I ever saw about people expressing their anger was against my beloved wife. And that was other family members who came rapping on the door, and I knew they were angry. I wasn't even going to let them in the house. Now, Bobby said, okay, let them in. So the three of them sat there and vented all the things that they thought were wrong about their mother or their mother-in-law. And I stood by and watched. Certainly I wanted to protect her from all that stuff. But to my amazement, she sat there and didn't say a word. Maybe you'd like to share what it was like for you, dear, when they did that. And you were so calm that you were a great example to me that you were able to absorb all that anger and not retaliate.
Well, first of all, I didn't think their anger was justified, so I truly didn't take it personally. I thought it was more about them than me. And for me to say so would be much too egocentric. So I just said, well, you guys, you got a right to a feeling. I don't agree with it, but go for it. So, I mean, my philosophy is, there's many years ago, a woman who was a corporate executive wrote a book called "You Can Kill Me, But You Can't Eat Me." So, what are you going to do? You want to crucify me? Be my guest. Yeah, that's fine. Because I wasn't that vested, and I didn't believe it to be true. Now, had I felt that what they were saying had merit and credibility, it would have been a different story.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to face it.
Yeah.
And my observing it, I thought there was some truth within it. There were some things that I could see where they were coming from my perspective, and that there was a slight ring of truth to some of the things that angered them, and that's probably true of all anger. Well, I don't know. That's
A lot.
too much of a category to say everybody and everything, but when we project our anger and hurt onto others, that's why I talked earlier about projection. The real awareness comes into the fact that you can, the very thing that you're pointing your finger at, the other person, is within yourself. And so once we come to that kind of realization, then we can give up our anger, or if we keep it on it, it's like being angry with ourselves. And if we hold on to that bitterness or that anger, it's going to manifest itself in some form of illness. So for me, then the healing game is to recognize, when you're talking about the shadow, that side of us that would find fault with others, to some extent, that is within ourselves. So unless we heal it within ourselves, if we heal it within ourselves, then we don't have to criticize others so much, or don't take it too seriously. But
And that comes back to the beginning of the talk, where we were talking about how we shared examples of moments where our best wasn't so great, and how we found grace for ourselves. And then that allowed us to then look at times when other people's best wasn't so great, and we could find grace for them as well. And we actually were talking about intergenerational healing, I think, before you guys popped on. A couple of examples were talking about our parents, or the people that were before us, and how we recognized they were doing their best. And so I'm just wondering if this clearing that you had in your family, did it allow some space for then a better relation to move forward because you were able to just listen?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't, and here again, it's hard to be, that clear about ourselves, because, we're the actor, but we're also the one who's actually acting out ourselves. But for me, it seemed like it sort of cleared up a lot of things that I was aware of. But I guess maybe A, I wasn't taking it seriously, or B, it just didn't seem to affect me too much. So maybe that's my own narcissism, who knows? Could be.
well, there was another example though. We had an office in a shopping center, and there was somebody that came into the I had an insurance business, she had her counseling office. And somebody came in and pointed their finger at you, I forget what it was now. And you were able to go with the flow. You didn't have to resist it, I guess. Do you remember what?
Yeah, like somebody had came in and said, "Who here drives a red Lexus?" And I said, "I do." He said, "Well, I got a bum ticket. Come on over and show you something." I said, "All right." So he showed me there was some spray paint had been sprayed around some place, and it looked as if my car was somehow involved. And I said, "Well, actually, I didn't do it, but I'll be happy to help you try to clean it up." I mean, I don't know how else to tell you.
So I think the lesson I learned from when the family attacked her, and she let it, like a duck, let water bounce off her back, and wasn't had effect of it. She didn't have to retaliate. What did that do? That kept the door open. So
Yeah.
so the family always came back, and we always had conversations, and so in a lot of families that doesn't happen. They hold on to that anger and they never speak to that person again.
Mhm.
So the word you're using for grace might be another word for that, would be enlightenment, to lighten up.
Yeah, to lighten up. I like that. And to connect something that Debbie said earlier. So like when I was talking about my situation where the faculty wasn't exemplifying what they had taught, and I heard Debbie say, well, I get why you were angry, because there was hypocrisy there, right?
Definitely.
And so that anger was just like a red flag that there was something that needed to be addressed and some sort of information. Now, I heard you also say, Charlie, that often when this anger comes out, it's really about what's inside of us. Was that about what's inside of me at that moment? Sure, it's that I had a trigger around people being hypocritical, but it was also about the fact that there was hypocrisy happening.
Exactly.
And so I think we get into trouble where we go too far to one end and you know, not far enough on the other. So we are indeed responsible for ourselves, but we are social creatures and we are absolutely meant to interact with each other. And there's always two pieces of a puzzle when people come together and what's happening.
Yeah, I think the point is well taken, and I don't know how we're finding that balance within ourselves, that when we are upset about something, what do we do with it? You know, do we project it? Do we find fault with others? Do we sublimate it? You know, one time I was pastor of a church, and I wanted to accomplish something, and the chairman of the board of the church was frightened by what I wanted to do. And so he came into my office and threatened me with bodily harm. And so what did I do with that? Well, I'm the minister, I know better, so I didn't retaliate. I stuffed it down. And in stuffing it down, it eventually came out. How did it come out? Well, I was teaching a class of mind-body science to a group of nurses that were part of our community. And then I said, well, I've got a problem. And they say, well, let's examine you, Charlie. And we did. And what we found out, or what I found out, I discovered was that the ailment I had was acute urinary tract infection. And what did that translate to when you went read Louise Hay's books, or somebody else that's familiar with projection, was I was pissed off. But I held that anger within me, and it generated into a urinary tract infection. I didn't retaliate against the chairman of the board or whatever. So the healing part of that was the awareness that I was stuffing it and not dealing with it. So the part that I needed to do was when we had a church congregation meeting, the thing that the chairman didn't want me to bring up, I brought up. I found the courage to bring it up to the congregation. So I wanted more than his opinion. So that helped heal the thing, but I guess that's how stuffing. So finding the balance between how we deal with the anger, I think can be elucidating, can be an opportunity for us to grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it sounds like you were doing your best in that period of time to deal with what happened. And it had ramifications on you that you weren't able to deal with it initially, that were negative in impact. And when you were able to look at that and learn from it, you're able to heal it and shift and move on.
Yeah. I'll share something with you that is highly personal and maybe blow some minds, but it's along the line that I had once a year. I would kind of have a migraine headache, and I had no idea. I wasn't feeling stressful at the time. I couldn't find any equivalent to what would cause my migraine headache. And now, but I was a third year student in another group that was studying holodynamics, which is another form of healing. So what happened was in the third year, there's about 20 of us studying together in a home one afternoon, and I got a migraine headache. So I said, let's work on Charlie, you know. And so we worked on Charlie, and Charlie, what's nice about that is I was able to guide myself through my own healing,
Mm.
and with the support and love of the people around me. And so what happened was I found myself in a former life, I don't know, maybe 14th or 15th century or something like that, where I was a monk and I was being burned at the stake, and the stake was sticking up my ass to my head. That was causing the migraine headaches.
Ooh.
And when I was able to forgive the person that or people that had done it to me, I've never had another migraine headache.
Wow.
So life is complex, but the art of healing is an opportunity for us to grow.
Absolutely. Wow, what a profound story. Whew. Well, Paula or Deb, I just want to make sure if you guys feel like sharing any sort of stories or how you relate to this topic even. No pressure to share, but we want to give an opportunity before end of our time.
Well, I think, going back to parental stuff, in my family, we were taught to judge everybody and ourselves most harshly. And I followed that pattern, unfortunately, through most of my nursing career until I realized that it didn't serve me. It only made me feel worse, and how much I had hated it when my parents judged. And it was kind of like looking in a weavy mirror saying, it's not good. You're not going to do this anymore. And I also realized as well that what I really hated in other people was what I really hated in me. They were just my reflection. So that was my impetus to make changes in my life and who I was. That's when I started doing healing work and healed me first. Still doing that, but it was like somebody hit me with a 2x4. You know, it was like, how come I didn't see that before? Because that's what I was taught.
Yeah.
So being the oldest, I've been able to teach my younger siblings, yeah, you can be mad at your mom all your life because she didn't protect you, but she didn't know how. She only had so many tools in her toolbox. We have a
Right.
lot more tools.
Yeah.
So
Mom was doing her best.
she was doing her best. It wasn't great,
Yeah.
but it was all she knew because of the examples she had. And that doesn't mean we have to stop where she stopped. That
Yeah.
means you get out there and you learn, you get more tools for your toolbox, so that you can be a better mother. Of course, I made sure I was never a mother because I didn't want to be a mother like her. But in consequence, I've been a mother to everybody in the world. So yeah, it works. But I do think I've been a better mother because I actually saw her mistakes, why she made them, why she couldn't protect her children, and why she was so judgmental, because she was so busy shredding herself that we got the overflow. And my dad too. He was really no different. So it helped with the forgiveness. It helped teach my family, not all of them, about forgiveness. It helped me get me out of that pigeonhole that they had me in. My brother still sees me as the bitch older sister who has to control everything. I am not that person. My husband actually looked at them one day and said, "You don't know your sister at all. She's not like that. She hasn't been like that for 30 years. Where have you been?" But their mindset kept me in that pigeonhole. I've come to forgive that. And hey, if that's the way you want to see me, fine. Just don't spend a lot of time in my life. And they don't. Those family members don't.
Yeah.
So it was, it was a hard thing to see,
Mhm.
because I thought I was a pretty good person. To find out that I wasn't, that I was extremely judgmental, and I still can be, and I know that about myself. But again, I think awareness is a
Absolutely.
lot of it. When you are aware of what you're doing, when you're aware of getting angry at that person because that person reminds you of what you are, you can change.
Mhm.
And you can do the best you can do. And I don't always do the best I can do either. I mean,
Well, you're doing your best all the time, I believe, Paula, but it's not always great,
It's
right?
not perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And
The
it
last
sounds like,
perfect one died on a cross. I don't want to go there. I don't need to go there.
yeah.
But yeah, so being the best I can be from day to day works for me.
Yeah. And it sounds like, you self-describing as being judgmental, even though you were doing your best and you were doing that, it sounds like because that was the example that you had, when you could look at yourself and say, okay, I don't like that. And then that allowed you to have grace for other people in your life who were stuck in that and hadn't had the opportunity to do their own work, to have this realization like you had. And so, yeah, I love that. It's a really good example. I appreciate you sharing, because that was spot on, Paula.
So thank you, Paula. It brought it around full circle to the word grace.
Mhm.
And so in the Bible, it says, with all thy getting, get understanding. And so it's the understanding that opens a portal to grace. And so it's even when you understand your brother's locked in his position about you, you can understand that you've been locked in those positions. So that's what gives you the grace to let it go.
I don't need that baggage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got enough suitcases to drag around. I don't need that one.
Good for you. Let it go.
Let it go.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you. That was all really good shares, and thank you for looking at the topic with me, because it's one that's really near and dear to my heart, and like I said, kind of the foundation of my spiritual work and connecting with other people. So appreciate you all.
All right.
Appreciate
Doing
what
this with me
you've
today.
done. That was great.
Thanks, V. And
Yeah.
Carrie, it's hilarious, your dog just laying
Yeah.
upside down
I love
like that. Like
That's
you're taking
Dana.
a walking stick or something.
Dana has to get her foot in every conversation.
Very cute foot.
Here comes the other one.
All right.
Yeah, you don't think about things like this when you've never had a Great Dane, and suddenly you do.
The
She's
lake
cool.
that doesn't end.
You know what that was?
Thank you, B. This was very interesting. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
So Nikki, what's happening next time?
Yeah, if everybody agrees, we could do the ordination for B next week. I just need some of your paperwork, B, and
Yep.
we've talked about everything. I think you've gotten everything
Yeah,
squared
yeah, I
away.
got all of the info from you. Thank you.
Okay.
And I have everything filled out, so I can scan it all today and send it in and go ahead and
All right.
pay the dues and all that. So yeah,
Okay.
great.
And
Great.
Paula, are you aware that we have enough people coming next week? Do you know anything about Sally and Laura who didn't make it today?
They both have told me they will be here next week.
Okay, perfect.
So,
All right.
and hopefully Kevin will be able to get on
Yeah.
next week since he has a part
And Nikki, if we invite somebody, can they easily get on the website?
Yes, yes, they should be able to get through the link that you went in today, should not require any kind of registration.
All right.
They should be able to go straight through.
Great.
All
Fantastic.
right.
Okay,
All
we'll see you all
right.
next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Have
good
a
week.
great week.
Blessed week, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.